Alright, time for another episode of my Game Design Guide series, where I want to talk about the best ways to be inspired for a genre and the do's and don'ts of it. And since I finished my book on shooters, what better genre to swap over to than talking about all the booming and the shooting and the gibs, jibs, and anything else that you can imagine. Shooters and reflex-driven design are some of the more popular games that we've talked about. It's a genre that, again, when we talk about shooters and platformers, they are very old in terms of the game industry space. And that means that a lot of the established practices and foundational elements are readily available for you. But that does not mean that this is an easy genre to create a game in. The reason why you want to study a shooter, much like with a platformer, is that this will really help you in terms of understanding feel when it comes to a game. Because reflex-driven games live or die based on the feel of this in the player's hands, whether it's a keyboard and mouse, a gamepad, whatever. And if you don't understand that, or if you don't grasp its importance when you're starting to build a game, you are really going to end up failing in this regard. So one of the other things about shooters and reflex-driven design like this is that these are some of the easiest games to market. Because here's what you need. I'm going to solve all your marketing issues very fast. I want to see 5 seconds of awesome. 5 seconds of insane, over the top, what the heck is going on in this game? It looks superb kind of footage. And you see, reflex-driven games are very easy in this respect when it comes to showing them off like this. If you're wondering how you show off 5 seconds of amazing stuff in a RPG or a puzzle game, well, we're not talking about that today, so that will be a problem for future Josh. But you see, conversely, if you cannot provide 5 seconds of amazing footage of your shooter, then you are failing your game, and it is not going to end up doing well. So I have a little bit of a story for you to explain this. Many years ago, and it was like 4 or 5 years, I was on a Facebook group where an indie developer was just posting some random footage that they came up with for a game. It was this like 2D side-scrolling shooter, and like the character like jump in the air, they had bullet time, they were like rolling, like kind of like walking on a barrel that was rolling. They shot a frying pan, and then they shot the frying pan, the bullets like ricochet around and hit enemies. It was really amazing and cool to look at. And with that descriptor, a few of you may be thinking about a game you've heard of. Well, after the developer posted that on Facebook, people were like, wow, that's cool, you should keep doing it. And I didn't really hear anything else from that developer again for a few more years. Then we fast forward to when their game was picked up by Devolver Digital and published all around. And you should probably know the name of that game. That was My Friend Pedro. You see, when we talk about reflex-driven games, especially those that are very much about the feel of the game, whether it's through visual controls or both, these are the games where when you have something cool, when you have something amazing, interesting, unique, insert adjective here, and the game has some basic aesthetics or art going for it, post that on social media. Again, when we talk about other genres, story-driven games, RPG-driven games, a lot has to be in place before you can really show off someone like, hey, this game looks amazing. Look at, this amazing artwork, great storytelling, great writing. With a platformer or with a shooter, show me something fun. And if you can do that in a 5-second GIF, that is how you start marketing these games. And you want to do this early. Because on social media, there are a lot of developers, there are a lot of publishers and scouts who are looking for that next weird thing, that next unusual shooter, or that platformer that doesn't look like anything else we've seen before, even just a unique puzzle game. Again, anything that you can show off that can convey what makes your game fantastic, that's what you want to do. And with shooters, again, This is all about giving the player something that they haven't seen before, or something just completely off the wall. How about a gun that pulls the ground off and creates pits? So you show your gun making a hole in the ground, the enemy falls into the pit and dies. You take this glob of earth, shoot at a tank, it clogs up the tank turret and explodes, and there's, metal flying all over the place and explosions. And if anyone's working on a game like that, I just gave you your 5-second marketing, and I expect a check in the mail by Monday. And reflex-driven design like this, again, it's something that you either get it or you don't. And you see, that is kind of where it gets very tricky to talk about. Because a lot of people will look at a shooter and they'll look at a platform and think, well, these genres are old. They're very easy to make a game in. I played Mario. I played Doom. Let me just repeat that and I'll make an easy platformer. And for developers who are established, this is one of the easiest traps you can fall into if you're just jumping into a reflex-driven game. If you've spent your career working on complex, over-the-top RPGs or abstracted-based titles, you have built entire combat systems, entire strategy systems for a game like Crusader Kings or Baldur's Gate, and you think that you can just jump in and say, well, I made this game, surely I can make Doom, or Quake, or Hexen, or whatever, you're going to be in for a very rough approach. And it's why we see, reflex-driven games like this, a lot of fantastic stuff, especially in the indie space, has come from relatively small or very early developers in their careers. People who, their first game may just be a platformer, or a third-person shooter, first-person shooter, 2D action game, whatever. Because if you grasp feel, if you can understand gunplay in your game, then you are going to be in the right position for this. And speaking about gunplay, if you're watching this video right now, and you have never heard anyone say the word gunplay before, you are not ready to design a shooter. Because this is, again, very foundational. This is vital to making a good reflex-driven game. Because, again, when we talk about shooters, it is all about that feel. This isn't like those little whiny RPGs where, oh no, someone said something mean to me. Let me roll some dice to see if I become sad. Here it's, where's my quad rocket shotgun launcher? Let me go deal with some enemies. And when we look at reflex-driven design, this is not something that takes minutes, hours, days, weeks, years for someone to determine whether or not they like it. This is, I start the game, I fire my gun, it feels bad, uninstall, I'm not playing this game anymore. But again, this is where that assumption comes in that a shooter, because it's not about an overly complicated RPG system, it's not about high levels of abstractions and systems, that it's very simple and easy to make. But you see, that is anything but the case, and it's become even more so over the past 5 years. Again, with the likes of Dusk, Ultrakill, Meat Grinder, Dread Templar, H-Rod, and many, 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 many more shooters that have come out, the bar keeps getting higher. And this is, again, why platformers and shooters are often very similar in terms of this kind of market. If you think, well, let me just study Mario, let me just study Doom 1, and that's all I need to make a competitive shooter or platformer in the market today, you are in for some bad times. And again, it's one of the things I talk about in my deep dive books, that just studying the game that was amazing and fantastic 20 years ago doesn't really help you, at least when it comes to creating new ideas and new concepts. You should study the greats, and again, a few of them will be on our game recommendation section coming up really soon. But you shouldn't just focus on those. Because again, times have changed. The market has changed. What people expect out of a shooter, a platformer, RPG, puzzle, whatever, has changed. And if you don't get that, you're going to end up spending a lot of time making a game that feels like it should have came out 15, 20, 30 years ago. And guess what? A lot of people don't want to play a game that feels like something they played 30 years ago, despite what hardcore fans will say. So before we get to our kind of games do's and don'ts section of this video, just as a quick recap, learning shooters, learning reflex-driven design, this is how you get good feel, a good UX from your games. If you can make a platformer or a shooter feel really fantastic, this is how you can market a game exceptionally well. Again, 5 seconds of awesome is what you're aiming for in any kind of reflex-driven game. And this, again, is the bare minimum. This is not some kind of super secret marketing advice that will lead to untold riches and fame. This is just what you have to do to be competitive. And when we get to our section here, there's one point I wanted to start with. The first game we're going to be talking about is Doom and Doom 2. Because again, they are very foundational stuff. But I want to drive this point home. The Doom kind of fantastic gameplay, this is not the Shangri-La of shooters. This is not the Mount Everest that you are trying to climb. This is the bare minimum. This is that line you just have to cross just to have a shooter. And I'm going to say this again when we get to that section. If you cannot create a shooter that is on par in terms of feel and gunplay as Doom 1, you are not going to be making a shooter for today. So I have some good news and bad news for all of you. The good news is that there's not going to be as many don'ts in this video compared to our last one. The bad news is that it's not because there haven't been many bad first-person shooters, is that a lot of them have all made this very same mistake. And again, it goes back to having bad gunplay and bad feel in your title. Because at the end of the day, if the player shoots their gun and they hate it, it feels horrible, no amount of amazing visual design, no heartwarming story that tugs at the heartstrings of everyone is going to keep someone playing. They're going to uninstall that game faster than you can say rip and tear. And speaking of which, I think it's time for our first do. And surprise, surprise, it is going to be Doom. Doom 1 and Doom 2 are 2 shooters, what Super Mario World is to platformers, or 2D platformers. This is a series, or these 2 games, have had probably the most inspiration and reach out of any other shooter to date. Especially if we add in all the mods, total, partial conversion mods, and everything else that's come after it. So, as I said in the last part, what makes Doom and Doom 2 very important to study is in the feel of what it's like to run around and rip and tear through these enemies. Even the most basic weapon in this game is still iconic in terms of the sound and gunplay that goes in it. The only thing that I would argue is a little bit dated would be the level and arena design. And again, that just comes with the fact that this game is now over 20 years old at this point. But in terms of creating good weapon design and making it feel right in the player's hands, Doom is second to none in that regard. So we're going to have a little bit of an experiment here. I'm going to show you guys, of course, E1M1. I hope you enjoyed my little speed run through the level. Now I'm going to show it again, this time without the video. Now I want to see if you can still imagine the game just through these sound effects. Alright, we got one more little test. I'm going to show the footage now without the sound, but video only. I want to see how you respond to this. And let me know if you can just hear the video without there being any sound whatsoever. When it comes to good shooter design, as I said, this is the kind of stuff that becomes universally famous. I'm going to bet that a few of you, while you were watching the last example, you probably still heard the E1M1 music in your head, despite there not being any there. Doom and Doom 2, again, this is foundational baseline gameplay. If your game cannot compete with what you've seen so far and playing through Doom 1 and Doom 2, then you really don't have a valid shooter today. And while there are plenty of examples of shooters, and we'll be talking about them throughout this video, that have evolved more beyond the level design, the gunplay, and enemy design, this game still holds up just as well playing for your first or your 100th time, just as someone who wants to play Super Mario World and study that for platformers. So, with that, we're going to move on to our first don't. And this is an unusual don't. It doesn't happen all that often, but it's something that can easily befall a developer who's trying to do something different in the space. When we talk about a major aspect, again, of marketing shooters or any kind of reflex-driven game, it's about showing what your game does different above anything else. And that uniqueness must be a part of the core gameplay loop, which, if we're talking about a shooter, would obviously have to be shooting. And Graven is unfortunately an example of a game that, from like the very beginning, it had an interesting hook of trying to be like a modern day version of Hexen, which Hexen itself combined first-person shooting, RPG progression, and spellcasting into its own unique loop. But after the initial kind of impressions of the game, fans notice a kind of a bit of a problem with it. That despite billing itself as a game where you have multiple weapons, multiple spells, and abilities you can use to kill your enemies, the spells just really didn't do all that much when it came to the combat side. And in like interviews and discussions, the developers' intent was that the spell casting was to be used for more puzzle solving aspects, while your kind of medieval fantasy weapons were to be used for the combat. And this was a mistake, and it's unfortunately one that has kind of haunted Graven throughout early access and into its 1.0. You see, the combat itself, just with its melee and ranged weapons, it's just okay. It doesn't do anything, again, that's above and beyond, and the game's unique selling point of having magic spells and abilities is just not there at the beginning. People have said that once you get further into the game, you can upgrade your magic, it can become more of a factor in combat. But you see, again, this gets back to what we were talking about in the first part of this video. People are not going to wait for your game to get good, especially a reflex-driven title. If it takes 5, 10, how many hours before you can actually start using your cool stuff, most people are not going to stick around. And with Graven itself, we played this for about like 2 hours on stream. I think we got almost done with the first kind of chapter, or the first major act, and the combat just didn't really go anywhere. I tried to integrate the flame and lightning spells whenever I could, but it just doesn't feel good to use them in combat, at least not at the start. And again, there are a lot of examples of shooters that all have a unique selling point, and that has to be integrated into the core gameplay loop. Because without it, then it's just a gimmick. And we can see this in Metroidvania games as well, where they'll have a power that's like the unceaseless destruction fire of death. And all it does is it opens up blue doors. You need to, again, put your unique selling point front and center, and it has to become a part of how someone plays your game. This, again, is an essential aspect of the immersive sim genre, where you can use all your crazy powers, gadgets, weapons, and tools in a variety of ways. As an example of a game that does kind of magic and combat right, that I'm not going to probably dedicate a whole entry to here, would be something like Clive Barker's Undying, where you have this like variety of combat, and the player can use any and all their abilities at any time. If I want to just go from fireball to shotgun to dynamite, I can do that, and it feels good each and every time you use that. With Graven, again, it feels like two separate worlds between the fancy weapons and your magic spells. And that's not how you want to design a shooter. Because again, there has to be there has to be that specific thing that's going to keep people playing your game above all the other myriad of shooters and boomers and running guns and all that. And with Graven, it just never managed to get beyond just this initial idea. And yes, I'm sure there are people who will be commenting below saying that the spells become amazing 3, 4, 5 hours in. And that is way too long. The spell should become amazing 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in. In Clive Barker's Undying, you can find a hidden upgrade for one of your spells, I think within like the first 40 seconds of playing the game, and within like the first 10 to 15 minutes, you're already finding some of the basic upgrades or getting access to more combat spells. And that is what you want out of these games. If you have something cool, let it be front and center in everything that the player does, because then you can build more interesting encounters and more interesting level designs around those abilities. If you don't have a variety of ways to test the player or make combat interesting, it will lead to your entire game feeling very repetitive very shortly. So with that, let's turn to a game that presented its one gimmick exceptionally well. And speaking of, let's get to an example of that with Superhot. Now, when we say the word gimmick here, I want to make this very clear. This is not to be derogatory towards the game. Superhot is one of the examples that really comes into play what I said in the first part of this video, and how being able to show off one unique selling point can be everything that you need to get a game rolling. For those of you who forgot the story, Superhot originally started as a game jam, and this whole idea of playing a stop motion bullet time battle really turned heads. And I cannot remember if it won the game jam or if it came really close to. Nevertheless, this idea of creating a game around a singular element is what sold everyone on it and what propelled the developers forward in terms of their appeal. Now, there's another aspect of this I want to bring up. When we talk about games that have a unique gimmick or unique selling point, something that kind of bucks the traditional trends of the genre, you have to understand that games like this cannot be designed around super lengthy experiences. I'm talking like 20, 30 hour long games. And there's a very specific reason for this. When we are dealing with something that is very original, it is far harder to create or continue to create unique and original content that best supports that design. A classic point of this would be something like Portal and Portal 2. That the more elements that you have to work with in terms of what the player can do, what the enemies can do, and the rules of the world, it affords you more abilities to change things up, mix things up, etc. With something like Superhot here, while they did add more to this, especially in the kind of pseudo-sequel / kind of like roguelike mode, it still is built on one specific way of playing it. And if they were to try and turn this into something very lengthy and trying to pad it out, the game would not work as well. When we're talking about games that are very reflex-driven, games that are very much about how it feels in the player's hands, you want everything to be on point. You don't want the player to feel like they're just going through the motions of the game. Now, Superhot here, if there's any issues with it, is that it can still feel very tricky to learn, especially with the fact that you only get one hit and you die. When they add in the kind of roguelike upgrade system, that did help things out, but it's still a game that you either get it or you don't. And that is by nature of a reflex-driven design. Every game that I've shown here, or will show in this video, there are people who enjoyed the heck out of them, and there are people who played for maybe a minute, maybe 5 minutes, and then they just stopped. And there's nothing you can really do in that respect, other than, again, work on your UI UX, and that is certainly beyond the subject of our video today. So to cap things off with Superhot, when you have something that is unique, that is different, that no one else is doing, as I said earlier, get that on social media. Show that off to people. Because if you can market your game around that and build the entire gameplay loop around that uniqueness, it will drive people to your game. To contrast this with Graven from the last part, the issue that Graven had, that the unique selling point of the magic and the spells, again, was separate from the gunplay and the core gameplay loop. Here, the entire game is built on this idea that, well, everything moves when you do, and everything is balanced around that, and all the cool abilities work with it. And that's what you want out of your unique elements. So with that, it's time to talk about another don't, and it is also time to bring up the controversial, I'm going to have rioters and an angry mob outside my video. So what game did I pick this time? And that is going to be Serious Sam, the whole lot of them. And I can hear the kamikaze screaming outside my window as we speak. Serious Sam is a game that came out right at kind of like the perfect time in terms of its marketing and depiction. In the early 2000s, this was when most shooters are starting to become more grounded. The idea of having only 2 weapons, slower paced shooting, Call of Duty, Halo, and the like. And Serious Sam stood out for just the sheer veracity of everything that's going on, the over-the-topness, the yelling, explosions, those damn bulls that charge you, and the like. But when we look at it today, of the kind of games we've been talking about in this video, it is perhaps the most dated in terms of its level design, its gunplay, and its enemy variety. And that is why it's on the don't list. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, especially in the design books, is how certain games are kind of a product of their own time, and they really don't hold up as well today, simply by the virtue of the evolution of the genre. And with Serious Sam here, there's 3 big areas where it's kind of lacking. I already mentioned them. The gunplay in this one is just okay. The weapons themselves do serve different purposes, and throughout the franchise, they do give you like more upgrades and ways of changing them around. but it never feels as satisfying, at least at the lower level weapons, to use them compared to, say again, the likes of Doom and the other games that have been brought up. The variety of weapons themselves also don't really get around when it comes to the enemy designs. Enemies in Serious Sam basically fall into two categories: stay way, way, way back and snipe, or charge you like a heat-seeking missile, as anyone who's had to deal with the skeletal, I forget their names, and the bulls can attest to. And while this works, especially with the game's most iconic enemy, the kamikazes, it just leads to combat feeling very repetitive. And it's a really good example of the difference between quality versus quantity with enemy designs and enemy variety. When we look at some of the later examples, as we'll be talking about games like Dusk and Ultrakill later on in this video, their enemies are designed to accommodate specific roles and specific functions. They have a difference to them. Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal are also examples of this. That each enemy is supposed to occupy kind of a different beat to the game's design. In this one, throwing 30,000 of the skeleton enemies, or 30,000 kamikazes, it's still fighting enemies who are doing roughly the same thing, charge the player. The skeletons, of course, had the added damage of kind of their little jump leap attack. But the problem that Serious Sam has always faced is that the enemies just don't feel interesting to fight after your 5th, 10th, 100th encounter of them. The heat-seeking ones are perhaps the most dangerous and oftentimes very annoying to deal with when you're dealing with the game's level design. Another aspect that is important to talk about when it comes to shooters is the arena and level design. How are you creating different and unique spaces to test the player? The problem that Serious Sam has is that most of the arenas are just flat area, 360 degrees around the player. Enemies come from all directions. Just throwing lots and lots of enemies at the player doesn't feel as rewarding to take them down versus enemies that kind of match or in sync with the arena itself. It's important to have an arena that is balanced with the enemies that you're trying to fight. If you just put the player in a completely wide open space and surround them with Reverence from Doom, yeah, that's hard, but it doesn't feel good to fight. You want the player to feel like the arena is part of the challenge. And a lot of that is balanced around not only what the enemies can do, but what the player can do. And Serious Sam being just 100% boomer arcade shooter, at least in the first 3, doesn't really give you a lot of additional tools and abilities to work with. Since you can't really have a dedicated dodge, it means that, well, if those enemies are coming at you at the right angle, there's not much you can do to avoid getting hit. And they try to again change this with, I think it was Serious Sam 4, but it still ran into that issue of having to unlock those upgrades to even feel balanced on the higher difficulties. And with this kind of gunplay, as I've said, it is the most dated in terms of its approach. And in today's market, people, quite frankly, expect more. As I said with the Superhot example, people want something unique. They don't just want to play your umpteenth Doom, Serious Sam, Quake clone, whatnot. You have to do something that can sell the game. And with Serious Sam's design, again, what made it stood out about 23 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, was the number of enemies it could throw at you. But we see games today that throw many more numbers at the player. And even with the likes of mods, there are some Doom mods where you are fighting hundreds, maybe even close to 1,000 enemies per level, if the developer really wants to go over the top. And like I said, more for the sake of more doesn't sell a game anymore. It has to feel different. You want every enemy to have a unique role. You want every level to feel different and memorable. Beyond, again, just big open area, lots of enemies. And with that, let's get to an example of a game that I'm sure you have probably been expecting at this point, in terms of why it should be on the do list. And that, of course, is Dusk. Dusk is very important as a game that kind of broke the barrier for indie shooters in the mainstream. It has become another standard that a lot of games have been judged by since, and is a great example again of level, enemy, and weapon design all on point. With the weapons, everything sounds incredibly meaty and is fun to use. The shotgun in this one I would say is up there along with the Doom shotgun as just feeling great. This game is perhaps one of the meatiest assault rifles I think I've seen, and we'll show footage of that in a few minutes. The also added benefit of this game is using physics as a weapon, such as the now famous soap strategy. But all the guns, all the weapons have a great feel to them, and this is also helped by the variety of enemies. There is a huge variety of enemies in Dusk, and this is helped by the fact that the game is split into 3 episodes, each one feeling very different to play in terms of what you're going to be doing. Once again, the enemies all occupy specific roles, there is friendly fire on for them, and you're going to have to adjust your strategy accordingly. Now with that said, this doesn't go into kind of push forward combat that we'll be talking about later on in this video. You can deal with the enemies very simply, and that is on point by the fact that the game still goes back to the whole arcade boomer shooter design. And when you're presenting enemies like this, again, by having a huge pool and a huge variety, it does help them kind of stand out or be evergreen in terms of where you can place them throughout the game. Now with the level and environmental design, this again is one of the major points and is a huge difference between that of Serious Sam and a lot of other lesser shooters. The 3-episode structure of Dusk really does help it, in that you can see this evolution in terms of how the level and arena designs grow throughout them. Episode 2 introduces like slow-mo, bullet time additional powers, along with general trippiness, and then this is further grown in the 3rd episode that features a huge variety in terms of the environment and the level design you're going to be in. There are levels where you'll be fighting enemies in very wide open areas, just as you'll be fighting them in narrow corridors, areas where there are hazards to deal with, and so on. And again, this is where you want quality over quantity in terms of your shooter design. It is again better to feature levels that are very memorable, enemies that are very memorable, than just throwing lots and lots of levels at the player and hoping that 1 or 2 maybe will stick out in some regard. And with Dusk, like I said, this is a game that has really gone on to become almost like the poster child for making a boomer shooter. It also has led to this problem with a lot of developers making a lesser example of Dusk, or again, just trying to repeat the likes of Doom and Hexen and Quake and Halo, and hoping that that will win over fans. But you need to do more. And again, if you've reached that limit in terms of the gunplay or the enemy design, then start thinking about making interesting and unique levels that stand out. And if you can do all that, maybe your game will be noticed by people. And again, I say it like that because even if you do everything right, that never guarantees success in the market. But when you have something that stands out, that again, you can show something memorable, this is how you build interest in your game, and that's all the more important now that the likes of Dusk is out. And that you have a competing game, or a game that a lot of people consider to be one of the best, and one of the examples of a game that's other games will be judged by as well. So with that, we have another don't, and this one goes way back, and that is going to be Blood. Blood is quite frankly like 2/3 a fantastic shooter. It features a great variety of weapons, including weapons that aren't just your standard gun, such as dynamite, a pitchfork, and other things. It features very memorable level and environmental designs. This was one of the first shooters to try to really integrate a sense of place to the levels beyond just being giant mazes. But where it fails and where it kind of gets on the don't list today is how frustrating it is to fight the enemies. And this comes down to one magical word: hit scan. Again, hit scan based attacks have been a staple of the genre since the very beginning. They are a way of providing a fast and very accurate weapon for the player and for the enemies. But when it's taken too far, when the hit scan is too accurate or the enemies are just too aggressive with it, it can completely kill the pacing and structure of your game. And Blood is unfortunately an example of this. In this one, most of the enemies in this game, especially a lot of the common ones, are all hit scan base. And this is not just like a hit scan in close range. They can snipe you from very far away with their hit scans. On the higher difficulties, they can just destroy your health bar before you can even get a chance to respond. And there's a lot of RNG in Blood that's far more unusual compared to other shooters. Not just in how enemies behave, but in terms of what their drops are as well. In some plays of it, you can get lucky and get the shotgun weapon from the starting enemy by a kill. Sometimes you don't. And then you're forced to rely on weapons that just don't feel right in order to get past them. The issue that Blood has, and I know this is going to be brought up by fans in the comments down below, is that there is a huge emphasis on a classic staple of FPS design, or boomer or arcade shooter design, and that is with the use of secrets. Many levels will feature, of course, secrets that can be free weapon pickups, free items, stuff that you wouldn't get until later on in the episode showing up early. And the game feels like it is balanced on the player getting access to all those secrets. As a good example of this, there is a level in the first episode where you're on a train. It's a very greatly designed level from an environmental level standpoint, but there's a point where you are forced to fight in a giant room, just nothing but hit scan enemies, and they will destroy you the second you open up that door in some cases. However, if you look around the level, you can find stuff like invincibility, multi-damage, or increased damage, and it's these kinds of items that are designed to give the player an out. But the problem is that you cannot balance and design your levels, or in any game in particular, under the assumption that the player is going to find all the secret and hidden MacGuffins. That's a great bonus for expert players, and if you're playing on the highest difficulty, that can certainly work. But when you're just building like the base game, or again, your skill floor, it can be very unfair to expect the player to know that they should have gone down the hidden door to find the hidden fountain that has quad damage that's somewhere placed around. And like I said at the start of the section, like Blood is almost as memorable or as great of a game as the likes of, again, of Doom, Quake, and so on. But when you have frustrating enemy designs, and that they kind of go against or they're counter to what the player can do, it leads to frustration. Most of the time in Blood, your best strategy is to do what a lot of designers don't want you to do. And that is hide behind a corner or hide behind a door, peek out, take a shot, go back in, peek out, take a shot, go back in, and rinse and repeat. Because again, if the second you step out, 5 enemies can all just shoot at you and there's literally no way to dodge it, then people are going to feel frustrated. And I'm not sure at this point which will be the more controversial pick, this or Serious Sam in the don't column. But I think we're about out of don'ts, but I do have a few more do's left to get to. Throughout this video, we focused on arcade, boomer shooters, very fast-paced, super shooting, sliding, jumping, and all that. But what about doing more grounded-based shooting? This is where every bullet really does matter. And the act of doing 360 no-scoping does not exist. And one of the best examples to this day for grounded combat is Stalker Shadows of Chernobyl. The footage you're seeing is taken with one of its conversion mods, one of the more popular ones, that the name escapes me right now. Stalker is a great example of presenting an open world FPS, but also providing forms of progression and abstraction without diving into the kind of being an RPG itself. There's no leveling up, you're not going to be pumping up your shotgun stat or anything like that. Instead, what this game does, it grounds everything in the kind of somewhat realistic world of the zone. You're going to be exploring, looking for anomalies, loot, more gear, and completing missions. The money that you earn is going to be used to buy access to new gear. And this is the major form of progression that Stalker employs. When you start out, you're just a guy in like sweatpants and a suit with a pistol. But you'll be able to get a machine gun, then a shotgun, then better armor. And then by the end of this game, you are using kind of Spec Ops, future tech guns, fighting off against all kinds of things. And what makes Stalker work so well in terms of its grounded gameplay is the fact that everything revolves around it. You're slow and you have to aim carefully, and so does all the enemies. You're not fighting against characters who can double jump in the air, spin around, shoot you before you even have a chance to react. Instead, there's a very methodical nature to Stalker, and what we see from other grounded games, where again, it's not about who's the most fastest or the most reactive, but who can get that one shot off before the other one does. And as another point that is a bit of a tangent for our video today, this is a great job of how you can combine this with horror. When you go underground and now it's dark and moody and what the heck is that thing that's coming at you from the distance? These are great ways of allowing to have your cake and eat it too, but it only works in this circumstance when the world is set up to accommodate for this more slower and grounded sense. As another example of a game that does this pretty well that we don't have too much footage of would be something like Hunt Showdown. But with Stalker, what you should be taking notice of is how the feel of each weapon type is radically different. That using a rifle is very different from using a shotgun, from using a pistol, and so on. Because it's this level of feel, and again, making every single bullet matter, that is important for how you want to define grounded gameplay. Grounded gunplay as well. That again, shooting 75 bullets in an arcade shooter and shooting just one bullet in a grounded shooter should feel entirely different. You want the player to feel that sense of power, that going from a 9mm pistol to a 12-gauge shotgun to an assault rifle should be a huge deal. It should be as huge getting a new gun in a game like Stalker as it is acquiring a new gun or finding a weapon upgrade in, say, Doom Eternal or Ultrakill. So, with that, let's get to our next do. We're up to 2 for 2 with having a double do, where I want to talk about two games that both do the same good thing. And this is about unique weapons. All the shooters we've talked about so far and will be coming up in this video have fantastic gunplay, the ones that are on the plus side of the column. But making unique and interesting weapons beyond just gun is a lot harder than it sounds. You can still have weapons that kind of operate under the same kind of motifs as shotgun, sniper, pistol, whatever. But making weapons that literally are unique from anything else on the market is something that really can help your game stand out. And it's also incredibly hard to do if you're not thinking beyond just standard gunplay. So the two examples I want to talk about, first off, is Bulletstorm. Bulletstorm is a game that got a lot of negative press out of the gate for its kind of very rude and crude humor. This game definitely has, I guess, a little bit of a potty mouth issue, and probably is like the most profanity-filled game on our list today. But this is from People Can't Fly, who of course made the hit Painkiller. And Bulletstorm is kind of an evolution of the gunplay featured in Painkiller, where every weapon not only was unique, but had a completely different alt fire, so that it basically allowed them to double up on all their weapons. And Bulletstorm takes us to an even further degree. You have, of course, your standard kind of stock weapons, a pistol, assault rifle, sniper, and so on. But how they are combined with their alt fires and with just the world itself is something that really hasn't been fully replicated since. You have your pistol that also can shoot this kind of like little rocket at enemies. Your sniper has the ability to actually curve bullets once you start shooting and then kind of trying to make those bullets like go into other enemies. You have kind of like a kick and your grapple hand that can push and pull enemies away. And all this is tied to one of the best kind of elaborate combo systems seen in an FPS in a very long time. The name of the game here is getting as much points as you can off your kills in order to buy new upgrades, such as allowing you to get the additional alt fires, improving your ammo capacity, and so on. But to earn those, you need to perform kind of skill shots. And this could be anything from a kick into a rocket, into a barrel, flipping or grabbing an enemy, pulling them towards you, shooting them and sending them flying at something else, using the environmental hazards, and so on. And this was many years before the likes of Shadow Warrior 3, Doom Eternal, Ultrakill, and so on, that really kind of embodied this idea that the environment is a part of the equation, with the arena designs and with how you want to use your weapons. And this is a great example of taking this kind of gunplay and elevating it further. Now, with that said, these guns, as I said, still occupy within the same kind of purviews of what we know and love. So that's why I want to talk about the second example, and that is Gunfire Reborn. I love Gunfire Reborn, as you probably tell by all the times we play it on stream here. And one of the things that this game does exceptionally well is branch out its weapons to all kinds of unique one-offs. Yes, there are shotgun type weapons, sniper rifle type, pistols, and so on. But no two weapons are exactly alike. One of your quote-unquote rapid-fire weapons is a little dragon that spits fire and corrosive damage, alternating every second of its fire. You have a shotgun that is basically like a Gatling gun shotgun, my favorite, the Illusion. There are sniper rifles that can shoot fire bullets. There's arrow snipers. There is the brick sniper, which is you just literally throwing a brick at people. And do not disrespect the brick. It is a really solid sniper. And that's not something you will say in a lot of shooters. And this is all compounded on top of the different modifiers, different rarities, and of course how the different characters will behave and what weapons and tactics they best use. And again, this example is about taking these weapons and figuring out how do we do something different with them. And it's a far, I think, better evolution of this kind of randomly or procedurally generated gunplay compared to that of Borderlands. And Borderlands, in of itself, did not have, I think, a good use of its procedural generation. It had really solid gunplay, and note that I'm not going to put it on the don't list. Maybe when we get to a design guide for Proc Gen, we'll come back to this one. But Gunfire Reborn does an excellent job of making the weapons feel unique, making them feel distinctive, and making them feel fun to use. And this is a great game to study if you're looking for different ways of approaching how to make a different pistol, a different sniper, and so on. And as a kind of like a slash recommendation, if you want a game that really try to do something different, there's of course Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, where this is both a third-person action and a first-person shooter with your entire weaponry built on shooting bugs of various attacks and properties at your enemies. it doesn't quite get on the rest of this list simply because it's not a pure FPS, but is again another example of a game that's trying to do different shades of what we normally see as gun in a lot of games. And with that, we have one more final do I want to talk about in this video, and I kind of saved perhaps the most monumental in terms of recent game design for the last, and that is push forward combat, a term and design style coined by id Software with Doom 2016, and then further elaborated on with Doom Eternal. And the game that I want to talk about that I think best represents this today is Ultrakill. And I saved Ultrakill for last because it really embodies a lot of the different topics that I've talked about in this video so far. Good level design, good enemy design, and of course, fantastic gunplay. And if I put this first, then there'll just be me talking about Ultrakill for the last almost an hour at the time of me recording this. Ultrakill best represents what push forward combat is and what it should be, and that is this kind of merging of action and shooter design. It features a lot of these staples of action gameplay. You have a dodge that grants you iframes. You have the ability to regenerate your health in this game by killing enemies in close range. And there's a far greater focus on tech, even more so than Doom Eternal. While I'm sure a lot of Doom Eternal fans will of course argue this in the comments down below, that it is quite challenging to play Doom Eternal at the high level, but Ultrakill really goes even beyond this, thanks to its actual combination of weapons. You have different kind of special tactics that you can use, and the game spells this all out in its kind of lore and glossary section that you find like the little weapon terminals at the start of each level. So you can shoot your pistol, your shotgun, your minigun, all that like we all know and love. But you could combine things, such as throwing coins in the air, switching to your rail cannon, and delivering a massive blast, which can just wreck most minor enemies and can speedrun a lot of the bosses. You could shoot the shotgun's core while it's being flung out of it as a grenade to create a massive boom. Use the rail cannon's kind of malicious face shot to turn into a mega boom that can also deafen you if you keep your speakers or your headset too loud. And these are just a few of the ways that you can do this. And Ultrakill, much like an action game, it embodies this idea that you are showing off as you shoot. And this is something that not a lot of shooters have really, I think, explored. Again, the closest would be something like Doom Eternal, but Ultrakill takes this to kind of that next evolution. And this is something, again, that it is very advanced design. This is not something that if you are new to shooters, that you are going to be able to emulate on your first game. There's a lot of expert level design throughout Ultrakill, with how the weapons behave, with how they feel, and again, how the enemies work. Great enemy design is evergreen. And I think I said this earlier in the video as well, that you can have your most common, basic level scrub, throwaway enemy be a legitimate danger on level 1, you can have them be in level 15, level 30, whatever, and how you set them up and how the arena is set up can use them in very different ways. It could be a very easy encounter, it could be a very malicious and evil encounter. And a fantastic example of that is of course P2 in Ultrakill, which at the time of me recording this video is de facto the hardest level in the game. None of the enemy stats are adjusted, none of the enemies have been tweaked or altered in any way that changes their behavior, but it's how they're placed and how they're combined with other enemies in the environment that greatly change how you approach this. And this is phenomenal arena design. The level design of Ultrakill as a whole is another solid example. Similar to that of Dusk, each level feels like its own unique element. Whether you are using your grapple hook underwater in one level, fighting across boats in another, going to war in the recent update. Everything feels different, and this is exactly the kind of level design you want in your shooter. That the player is never sure what is going to happen next, but they know they're going to be in for a good and a very challenging time. Gunplay once again is very solid, and Ultrakill is an example of a game where ammo is not really a part of the equation, and that I think can be a little bit of a controversial aspect depending on who you talk to, because you never have to worry about reloading your guns. Now, Doom Eternal of course allows you to recover ammo by killing enemies with your chainsaw. Ultrakill simply removes that, and this is a very important thing to study as a designer. How much kind of mental gymnastics do you want the player to do at any given point in your game? Doom Eternal is, I think, far more button heavy than Ultrakill, with different grenades, different powers, and so on. While Ultrakill is fewer buttons, but is more advanced with how the weapons interact. You need to remember, in the heat of all the combat, okay, if I want to use the rail cannon, can I combo this with anything else? Can I use my shotgun in a different way? The rocket launcher, and not to mention all the different alternate fires and different versions of each weapon as well. And again, this is very expert level design. And when you combine gunplay, level design, enemy design in this way, it leads to a very unique game. I didn't even mention the bosses yet. Ultrakill by far has the best boss design of any FPS I've played easily. It goes far beyond what we saw with Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. The bosses are legitimate threats, and again, a major part of that, and part of what we want to see with this kind of push forward combat, is this merging of action design with shooter gunplay. That the bosses are as reactive and as unique as the player. The first time you fight something like V2, Gabriel, and of course Sisyphus Prime and Minos Prime are massive challenges. And that is, again, something that we normally don't say out of a shooter. We could be, describing Souls-like bosses right now. And this, again, is what makes this game so unique, and why, if you have any interest in this idea of push-forward combat, that you need to study it. Look at how you are given so many tools. Look at how the game promotes and wants the player to show off. And also look at this kind of pacing of combat, because that is another aspect of push-forward combat. In all the shoes that we've shown up until this point, the player is supposed to kind of hide if they're taking damage. They're supposed to have this period where they may become passive or defensive. Ultrakill and Doom Eternal do not have that. The whole point is that offense is the best defense. And this requires a lot of balancing and attention to detail in terms of how animations play out. How can the player recover their health? Is there a limit to this? Is the player safe during animations? Because if you don't think about this stuff, if you don't understand what it means to kind of always be engaging the enemy, it can lead to combat feeling very frustrated, very chaotic. And Doom Eternal and Ultrakill are chaotic as is. You don't need to make it any more than that. And again, here's one final point about Ultrakill. At the time when we recording this whole essay video right here, the game is still in early access. Like, it's not done. And it's already one of the best shooters I've seen, and one that's going to be worthy of study, I think, for years to come. And even if by some strange circumstance they kind of fail the landing and the last chapter or the last layer is bad, it will still not erase the genius of this game. And this is also, as another point, or final point, a great game to study in terms of difficulty design. The game right now features, at the moment, two kind of categories of difficulty. You kind of have easy, normal. You have kind of like normal, and normal hard. And then there's going to be the third category, is going to be basically, I think, hard, and then hard masochism. And when you go up or down the difficulty settings, the enemy's behavior changes. On the easier settings, shots are slower, enemies are more passive. On the higher settings, enemies are faster and they're more reactive. This is how you want to design your difficulty in a reflex-driven game, because adjusting stats is not going to change if someone is not having enough reflex or is not good at hand-eye coordination to fight an enemy on normal, easy, hard, masochism, whatever. And if you can get all this done right, this is a fantastic way to build a shooter, a huge feather in your cap, and definitely something that you want to show people on social media to get them excited about your game. Alright everyone, that's going to do it for today's deep dive. To summarize what we've talked about, again, the games that I focused on for our video, for good and for ill, you want to give them all a check and pay attention to the aesthetics that go into shooting, the feel, the weapons, the sound effects, the art, and whatnot. Because this is, again, a genre that it's very easy to think that it's a very simple one to make, put a few red barrels, shoot a few guns, and you'll become rich and famous. But no, it takes a lot more work to it. With that said, let me know what you think about today's video in the comments down below. What massively important shooter did I miss out on that it completely invalidates everything that I talked about? What game are you willing to, die on that hill to defend that I mentioned here? Let me know down below. And if you want to know a lot more about shooters, first, third, multi, and so on, be sure to pick up a copy of my book, Game Design Deep Dive Shooters, coming in 2024. The book is done, the cover is finished, it's all off to the publisher, and it will be coming out soon. And also, if you'd like to support the channel, be sure to visit our Patreon, Discord, and all that. And Patreon donations are going towards getting more daily streaming. So, if you want to see even more games, more shooters, and all that, you know how to do that. And lastly, if you'd like to suggest a topic for a future deep dive, let me know as well. And with that said, everyone, thanks for watching, and have a great night. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to do the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my books wherever they are sold. Visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games.